Chaos J.
All right.
He says that I was thinking about the idea that the primalists are involved with the old gods. So primal dragons, the Proto Drakes are from the elements of Azeroth, and in the
Yeah.
beginning, the elemental forces were on the at war with the old gods. So if the primalists are corrupted by the old gods, would they view them as the same as the Titan influence on the aspects?
My initial thought was that the primalists serve the old gods. The reason I had that thought was Galakrond. If you look at the sort of changes and the transformations that happened with Galakrond's body, it's very old god-esque. You know, extra eyes everywhere, extra limbs everywhere, even eyes on his tail. And when you think of old god monsters, that's usually what we see, right? A lot of these eyes and shit. But then, of course, we had we literally just played through the final moments of the Bronze Dragonflight questline, and then I sort of asked the question, what if the old gods are actually based on the realms of decay? So the old gods are not actually of the void, but rather of the elemental planes of decay. And what we saw, because we know that Galakrond was the primal incarnate of decay, that's why he resembled so closely the old gods, because, you know, the old gods resemble so closely the realm for which he was the champion. With that being said, if we want to talk about cool stories, so if we want to talk about what I would like to see, I kind of like the idea of the primal incarnates and the primalists not being beholden to any of the cosmological forces. If you think about what Razageth says, what Iridikron says, what all of these primal incarnates and the primalists say, they speak about the Titans and the corruption of the Titans, the way in which the Titans destroyed Azeroth, destroyed dragonkind. Now, if it turns out that the only reason they believe that is because they happen to serve the old gods, right? Because who cares? Yeah. Okay, so in other words, the Titans didn't actually do anything wrong. It's just that you happen to serve the opposite of the Titans, and that's why you think the Titans did something wrong. Whereas it becomes a lot more impactful if they don't serve the old gods. In fact, they hate the old gods as much as they hate the Titans. Their problem is far more ideologically driven. So it's far more a problem of the Titans interfered with who we should be. That would be such a cool story. It's not entirely obvious to me that that is the case, purely because of how easily Proto Drakes can be corrupted. Something that stood out to me and that has sort of bugged me for quite a while. Why did the old gods not interfere with the Proto Drakes before they became aspects? The Proto Drakes are they're connected to Azeroth in the same way that the Elemental Lords were. And if you don't remember, because of the connection the Elemental Lords had to Azeroth, the old gods had no problem infecting the minds of the Elemental Lords and the elements. They drove the elements mad because they could. Because like Deathwing, the elements were connected to Azeroth. But all Proto Drakes are very closely connected to Azeroth, because all of the Proto Drakes come from the elemental planes. They're literally the children of the elements. And so why did the old gods not interfere with the Proto Drakes before? But then, of course, we get into the discussion of Galakrond and what exactly led Galakrond down this very dark path of him finally deciding to absorb and consume his own kin, something that the Proto Drakes themselves didn't even do. You know, even the most, and this is actually made very clear in the lore, even the most primal of Proto Drakes, we're talking about the different levels of Proto Drake intelligence. You had the ones that basically primal instinct driven, do whatever the hell their instincts tell them to do. Then you had the ones that could speak and they could kind of plan, but they had no concept of loyalty and sort of the greater good, the greater viewpoint of things. They only cared about themselves, a little bit about their clutch, and nothing for dragonkind as a whole. And then, of course, you had the aspects and Galakrond. These were the dragons that they understood the concept of speaking, they understood the concept of language, they understood the concept of loyalty, they understood the concept of the greater good, or at least the greater vision, and they fall into that category. But even the Primal Instinct-driven Proto Drakes never consumed each other. Like, they would fight, and they would sometimes fight to the death, but they would never eat each other. Cannibalism was completely against their rule, their base rule set. And yet, Galakrond discovers some kind of hidden power and then gets sort of driven to eating and consuming his own kind, and through that grows big and strong.
Yeah.
What was that?
What if the reason that they didn't attempt to manipulate the Proto Drakes was kind of maybe twofold? They were able to. They saw bigger fish in the Elemental Lords and thought if they could get to the Elemental Lords, they would get the entire Elemental Planes. Like, if you get the leader, the whole force will follow with them. So perhaps the thought process was, we'll infect the big four Elemental Lords, and then with that, the Proto Drakes from those respective realms will come along with them.
Well, this is where things, just before you continue, this is where things get really interesting. The Proto Drakes were born within the Elemental Planes, but they are not connected to them. They do not serve the Elemental Lords. This is something I got completely wrong. I did a little bit of research on this the last few days. There is no evidence that any Proto Dragon ever served one of the Elemental Lords. They could do so if it benefited them, but they weren't compelled to. They weren't connected to the Elemental Lords. They were connected to the Elemental Plane from which they were born. So they would use the magic of the Elemental Plane that they were born in, but they weren't connected to it. It's not like the elements. So whenever you're running around and you see these elements sort of floating about, they are connected to the Lord of their Elemental Plane. You know, so when you see wind elements, they're connected to the lords of I think Alakir is dead. Who's the new?
Thundaris.
Yeah, so they're connected to Thundaris, right? But the Proto Drakes, while they have the ability to use wind element, or the element of wind, they're not connected to the Elemental Plane or to the Lord of the Elemental Plane. So that would probably not have worked, I think.
Yeah, which is what I was leading to the second point, is once they did gain the allegiance of the Elemental Lords and found out that the Proto Drakes didn't come with that, they may have turned their attention to Galakrond, seeing how his hunger was just steadily growing, and perhaps they took a very passive approach to it and just maybe nudged him further into becoming the incarnate, the first incarnate we've ever encountered, the incarnate of decay. And because of that, if the old gods are in fact part of the essence of decay, their thought process would have been, we are older than him, we are smarter than him. Once we get a some kind of connection to him, we can yoke the Father of Dragons to our will. And then maybe they were thinking that it follows the same logic, that if you get the leader, the rest of the dragons will follow. Like, maybe they didn't have this concept that the Proto Drakes were individuals and would be similar in function to the elements, how they are tied to their lord.
There's a couple of problems there. Just quickly want to say, Rito, $10, dude, really appreciate that. And thank you so much for the questions. You absolutely rock, bro. There's a couple of problems with your theory there. First and foremost, Galakrond wasn't hungry until after he met with whatever power turned him on to consuming corpses. So Galakrond Galakron's hunger only started once he met with this power. He wasn't like just from the beginning consuming shit tons. In fact, he used to be known by a lot of the other Proto Dragons. Malfurion knew him quite well. Not Malfurion. Malygos knew him quite well. Nosdormu at some point, I think, speaks about him as well. They knew him. And he was actually considered to be quite benevolent. He was actually considered to be quite a nice dragon. As nice as Proto Dragons could be, but he wasn't considered to be like an asshole or whatever the case might be. And then, of course, he meets with some mysterious force and now he starts consuming things. And it's sort of like the problem with his consumption was that his consumption was driven twofold. The first is Proto Dragons have this innate power to grow more powerful based on what they eat and how much they eat of it. So the more they eat, the more powerful they grow. He then, of course, starts eating other dragons, and this makes him grow tremendously fast. But it has to be sustained. So if he ever stops eating, he actually starts losing power. So he sort of has a push and a pull effect that's taking place. Something is pushing him to eat more, but he's also being pulled to eat more. The other thing is that Galakron wasn't the father of dragons because he was the father of dragons. He wasn't the leader of the Proto Drakes. Galakron is considered, or at least the aspects lied about Galakron. The aspects, this is something that a lot of people might not know, but the vast majority of dragons alive today do not know of the war between the Proto Drakes and Galakron. They don't know the story of Galakron. The aspects decided to tell dragonkind only that Galakron is the father of dragonkind. They never told them why. The reason Galakron is considered to be the father of dragonkind is because after the fight against Galakron, dragons were born. Since Proto Drakes are not dragons, they're not considered dragons. So yeah, that's the only reason. So it's not obvious that the old gods would have looked to Galakron as the one to corrupt in order to corrupt anyone else. It makes it very... yeah, it makes it questionable at best, I guess.
Yeah, in that case, it's interesting that they couldn't get a hold on any of the Proto Drakes. Like, did they even attempt to do so? As you had mentioned, Proto Drakes are extremely malleable. I mean, just give them a source of power near them, and they basically just get infused with it almost by osmosis.
Yeah.
Like,
they'll just accept the power, whatever
insane.
The fuck the power is. It will just infect them. The other option that it could be is that they were freshly inside their prisons, and so at that point the prisons were still so strong that the old gods just didn't really have the ability to do so. That's one of them. And yes, I know about the water, but the water doesn't actually explain everything, because the water itself isn't enough of an explanation. It gives us a place. It still doesn't give us a why and a who, more specifically, which is the main question. But yeah, we went through it. We had a whole video where we went through Tyr's report. And also it comes from Tyr, which immediately makes you question, is this even real? Because it was Tyr and the other keepers that told the dragons not to tell anyone else about the fight with Galakron, but to instead just say that Galakron is the father of all dragons. This, by the way, is why when all dragons die, they head to Dragonblight. They lie down next to Galakron's corpse, and there they die. Because Galakron is the father of dragons. They don't know of the war. They don't know why there is a war. So we don't know anything. This is why I question everything. It's the most fun ever to be a WoW speculator these days, because there's so many question marks and so few answers to those question marks. But all in all, I think fun. I'm having fun, at least. I hope the rest of you are too. Yeah, that's it, I think. And that's it for the Q&A today. So I really appreciate all of you for asking questions, everyone that came out. Remember, if you want your questions answered in the next episode of the Q&A, you can do so by going to Discord, ask your question in the Q&A section, and I'd be happy to answer it. Hopefully more of you join the voice channel so we can get some actual discussions going, because those are the ones that are truly